That's funny because if I'm being honest, all week I've just been so sad.
I look at you guys and it feels meaningful. And I can't explain it, but even when we're just sitting around the pool talking about whatever and name shit, it still feels very fucking deep. And I'm just happy to be at the table.
Rip to another glorious season of The White Lotus with a whole new crop of complicated characters, some who were too good for this world and others who I cannot believe got to live to see another day. This is a discussion of The White Lotus Season 3 and there will be spoilers, so please prepare accordingly. Season 3 has been such a ride to follow week to week and it's brought back what so many of us love about The White Lotus. We saw these intricate relationships between friends, families, lovers. Sometimes those things overlapped. There was a lot of self-exploration and questions about morality and how far you're willing to go to get what you want. Class and privilege was a big theme, as it usually is with this series, as well as a focus on Buddhist ideas of death and suffering. But one of the things that ended up standing out to me the most was the three beautiful besties reuniting. They navigated around each other's changing lives, swapped awkward compliments, gossiped about whoever wasn't there, and ultimately genuinely accepted each other. It was gripping, even though I can't always keep their names straight. Turns out this is by design, as creator Mike White explains. I had this idea of three friends that are almost interchangeable at the beginning, and then you start to see how they're just slightly different and the differences start to really unravel their time there together. Sounds straightforward enough on paper, but the way Michelle Monaghan, Leslie Bibb, and especially Carrie Coon brought this to life on screen was unexpectedly deeply captivating. I started questioning why I found these women so fascinating, and I, like many other people watching the show, basically boiled it down to how real and messy their friendship was, and how we don't often see that on screen. And I'm realizing how much that actually impacted me.
Guess who I am? What? What? Peppa Pig.
The White Lotus Season 3 certainly continues its legacy of showcasing these flawed, often unlikable characters and gives them room to evolve or stay exactly the same, because sometimes it be like that. Craig remains the undefeated champion of the White Lotus, waltzing off into the sunset to his happily ever after, watching some guy fuck his girlfriend. Rick gives in to his repressed childhood trauma and dooms our sweet angel Chelsea to their entwined fate, the consequences of which have both Saxon and Gaitok leaving the White Lotus as changed men, both expanding their expectations of masculinity in completely opposite directions. And I really love that the show doesn't hold back in portraying its female characters with that same flawed messiness, some of which is redeemed and some that really isn't. Victoria Ratliff stays winning, successfully convincing Piper that their privileged life and superficial luxuries are in fact very important to them. Belinda immediately pulls a Tanya on Pawn Chai and backs out of a verbal agreement to open a business together because she's rich now. Who could blame her, really? Sweet, innocent Mook gunning for Gaitok to man up and be a killer? Like, the girlies are thriving in the morally grey, and it's delightful. And if we're going to start thinking about the White Lotus Hall of Famers, you cannot go past Megan Fahey as Daphne in Season 2. Daphne took self-care to a whole new level, strategically putting herself first in a world that so often demands the opposite from women, especially mothers. She revels in her femininity and perpetual optimism, but never at the cost of her own intelligence or happiness. She kind of rewired my brain for how nuanced or morally compromised female characters can be allowed to be, yet still respected and even admired. She did a lot of that work through those subtle micro-expressions in that finale scene.
Those kinds of moments happen when I'm not at all thinking about anything other than like the stuff inside my head that is like happening in the scene. It's like a deeply unself-aware thing.
Does anyone come to mind who's also carrying on that like incredible micro-expression legacy?
From the third season, all I can say is that I am so in love with Amy Lou. I just think she's so wonderful, and she's got that kind of face where it's like, no matter what she's doing with it, I'm interested.
It's not easy for me, Rick. I'm an Aries. I need everything out in the open.
Belinda is another character who undoubtedly chose herself. And hey, why not? Yes, it was a little brutal to see her treat Pawn Chai the exact same way she was in Season 1. But I mean, compared to the guy who was seconds away from a quadruple murder-suicide, I think she's good. Mike White makes room for these characters and doesn't judge them, which allows for these incredibly interesting, complex portrayals of people that feel extremely human.
This season is filled with people who have secrets, and it's just this sort of breath of fresh air, but then you realize it's not as fresh as you think. It's kind of stanky. The three women, their story is so powerful, as you said. When Carrie Coon, after they first have their sort of toast to Thailand, goes to the bedroom and just wails, there's this, she's like this shaken can of soda that just allows herself to express everything she's been holding down. It really speaks to the fact that the people that grew up with us, they hold parts of who we are, and it's hard to kind of introduce new versions of yourself to each other and accept them, and while still holding, you know, that space for who they were.
We're all friends. It's whatever. She can do what she wants. It's not a big deal. It's not a good idea.
I didn't think I'd find myself looking fondly at Jacqueline, Laurie, and Kate's seemingly tenuous, dare I say, shallow friendship at the start of the season. A lot of people related to the all too common experience of friends who would interchangeably gossip with each other or falling back into old patterns with old friends. But the finale wrapped it up in a way that made me rethink my judgment. Yes, Jacqueline was a little vain and selfish. Kate was a little fake. And maybe Laurie did set herself up for disappointment and kind of held the other two women at arm's length. I'm not saying that their friendship is necessarily anything to look up to, but it did feel like important steps were made. Laurie accurately called out Jacqueline and Kate, and then she wielded that sharp criticism back onto herself. She could have chosen to let that friendship go if it wasn't serving her, but clearly it was. She loves these women and they love her. Their whole arc sure wasn't pretty, but it was beautiful. If you'll indulge me with an analogy about Asian representation, which I feel very strongly about as well. Yes, it's amazing to get these portrayals of Asian female characters who aren't just submissive, passive wallflowers or hard-ass tiger moms. But we also have to face the tough shit, like these painfully complex parental expectations and deeply ingrained patriarchal culture, because that stuff is real.
Women are always pitted against each other in this way. The world compels us to engage in competition even when we love each other.
Their tangled friendship made me realize that I feel like I tend to see two extremes of female friendship on screen. Bitchy frenemies who are so often used to support that narrative that women are flighty, emotional drama queens, or besties who back each other no matter what. That narrative certainly is shifting, aided by the downfall of the cool girl and the rise of the girl's girl. It's been so healing to see that shift happen before my eyes, and honestly in my own head. I was admittedly a victim to the cool girl narrative and tried to veer myself away from typically feminine interests and believed that female friendships were inherently full of drama. I kind of had a mild identity crisis when I realized I actually loved makeup and fashion, which I can't believe I thought that was a bad thing. And it put me on a much needed journey to untangle my deeply rooted internalized misogyny and realize that girls are cool as fuck. And not when girls are like one of the boys, but when girls are girls.
Anya, 4 including you.
I just love you.
Here's the thing. I do think women tend to get more caught up in the emotional nuances and complexities of relationships. However, literally, who said that's a bad thing? Female friendships tend to be more frequently relied on for social support, and women are more effective at providing support, which is associated with physical and psychological benefits. Anecdotally, I can say that the women in my life are the ones more likely to organize events, reach out to catch up, and yeah, sometimes talk shit. The idea that female friendships are overly complicated or dramatic or messy feels like an incredibly negative spin on what it takes to have an emotional connection. And I fear that one of the root causes is the tendency to dismiss female emotions entirely. Being emotional is so often wielded as an insult to women in respect to typically feminine emotions. Yet typically masculine emotions like pride and anger don't tend to attract the same emotional label. I'm definitely not saying that men aren't capable of complex emotional relationships, but I do think there's a tendency to portray being emotional as this overly dramatic feminine trait, which doesn't really help anyone. Seeing these women with all their emotional highs and lows and imperfect friendship play out in The White Lotus, where it isn't judged in the story but simply allowed to exist, felt oddly revolutionary when in fact it's just so normal. Like, yeah, women can be messy and emotional and flawed, and we have every right to be.
It's very true. The world's a fucked up place. Oh.
What's wrong with it?
Are you joking?
I'm just loving this era of celebrating flawed female characters. Of course, we can criticize them for their legitimate flaws, but we're not going to dismiss or condemn them entirely as if an immoral woman is an abomination against nature. And yes, these characters have existed and been celebrated long before these three divas on The White Lotus. But we've also come a long way from these characters often being overtly villainous caricatures or vehicles for some greater message. It's that middle ground, that morally grey area where some of the most interesting aspects of womanhood can actually be explored. It wasn't too long ago that characters like this were barely given a chance before being written off as the worst characters ever. Instead, they're allowed to be messed up, nuanced, fleshed out characters. Given the room to be flawed outside of one-dimensional gendered tropes like hysteria or being too emotional, it's great to see that women can be just as evil and villainous as men and still have plenty of fans. Even better, it's great to see female characters fully embody these tropes and expectations of femininity, but with the additional depth it deserves. It shouldn't need to be said at this point, but the embracing of these White Lotus women seems to underline the point that women are human. Seems simple enough.